Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. We're recording this one about 11 hours after the end of the big game, or at least that's what the lawyers say we're allowed to call it. Anyway, there's one member of our panel. It's not Jordan Leichnitz. It's not Kory Teneycke, and it ain't me. One member of this panel who used to be, in the days when Paul Wells said Maclean's was a serious magazine, used to do NFL commentary for Maclean's magazine, used to write analysis of NFL football for Maclean's magazine. So that is Scott Reid, right? In addition to all of the other expertise he brings to this panel, apparently an expert in football. How much did you lose on the Niners yesterday?
I haven't had. I got a note from BetMGM telling me that this is how bad it was, telling me that one of my bets had been incorrectly credited as a win, and that I'm not kidding. This like
I thought you got a notice from MGM saying they were taking Sam.
Brock Purdy for over 12.5.
You can FedEx the deed to your house by 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, but anyway, I don't know. What can I dive in? Look at me, man. I'm unshowered and.
What was the TSN turning point?
Happy. I don't know. I can't. You know what? The only way I'm able to cope is to not think about it. I'm a lifelong, like in 1979, I fell in love with the Niners. I've been a lifelong fan. I was all in on this game. We lost 4 years ago to the Chiefs. And I don't know. I'm unconvinced there's ever going to be cause for hope again. I'm like a Trudeau cabinet minister. I'm utterly bleak. So I can't break the game down. If I break the game down, I'm just literally, I'm going to
You're going to break down?
I'm just going to crack open some, cleaning vinegar and guzzle it right here in front of everybody. And that'll be my water.
Well, I think that Kory and Jordan's faces reflect probably our audience. So
I think the good news is that I hear that Taylor Swift won the game. So I'm happy.
And then you have to listen to all the fucking incels complain about Taylor Swift. It's like, buddy, just get over it.
It's just a great way to weed out your friend group right there. Self-sorting.
Although the way her boyfriend went after his own coach there, he could have some tendencies. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Memories of the first half.
Here's what the next hour looks like. Lots of fresh polling out there, and unless your name is Pierre Poilievre, it's a goddamn disaster. Now, some people apparently in Ottawa are talking about whether or not Poilievre is peaking too soon. We'll take a look at that. Our cursed clipping is Paul Wells' excellent opposite of garbage column on Bell Media and Trudeau. And then there's this interesting Ontario political dynamic. Ford and Poilievre don't get along. Ford and Trudeau do get along. Crombie and Trudeau have different interests. The NDP is a wild card in this whole thing. We'll break down what's going on in Ontario for a little bit. And finally, it'll be Gordon Pinsent and our Hey Yous. So, Jordan, you're back from the jungle. Feeling good?
I mean, I'm here.
Yeah.
So, feeling good. I mean, it turns out it's better where there's a beach, but it's okay. I'm here. I'm good.
You are so much less likely to be bitten by a scorpion now than you were last week.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And we didn't actually find any scorpions where we were staying this time, but it has happened in the past. Although I think the most awake I've ever been was the time that I woke up and went to go make a coffee and there was just like a tarantula chilling in our sink. I felt very alive. So yeah, it's true. Many fewer things likely to kill you here. So that's a plus.
Yeah,
you've utterly jinxed her now, Herle. She's almost certainly going to be attacked by a scorpion.
One of my luggage right now.
All right, let's get to this peaking too soon business. Let me give our listeners a glimpse of the latest polling. This is an excerpt from the Toronto Star. A new poll from Abacus Data revealed that, no, this is from 538. I think I'm taking this from 538. Sorry, Philip.
338.
That to you. 338. Whatever the hell it is. How many seats are there in Canada?
Christ, pull your act together. Fuck, you're worse than I am.
I'm tired. All right. New poll from Abacus Data revealed that the Conservatives have taken a crushing 19-point lead over the Liberals. LPC trails the Conservatives by 18 points in Atlantic Canada, by 14 points in Ontario, by 26 points in British Columbia, and the Liberals are even in a statistical tie with the CPC in Quebec, something which Leger confirmed in a Quebec-only poll over the weekend. Abacus measures government approval at an all-time low, 24%, with only 14% of respondents expressing a desire to see the Liberals re-elected. All this despite CPC leader Pierre Poilievre getting lukewarm numbers at best. Poilievre's net approval is at +2. Trudeau's net approval is at a dismal -33. By the way, 1 out of every 2 men in Canada is supporting the Conservatives. So just think about those odds when you're talking to people about politics. So, Kory, you have run campaigns from behind. You have run campaigns from ahead. My theory is always better to be ahead. Never better to be behind.
Yeah. I'm not sure peaking too soon is a thing. I really don't. Like you're better to be ahead, and you're better to be ahead by 20 points, which is basically what these polls say, and not just a little bit better. You're 20 points better. So look, as you say, it's bad news there for everybody except Poilievre. But it's shockingly bad news when you look at numbers like the Quebec numbers. Like it's very difficult to see a path without some very fundamental change. Like I would say up to and including the leadership of the Liberal Party. How do you drag yourself in the amount of time they have from a -33 leadership rating and 20 points? Like a great campaign. You might shift the polling numbers 10 points. It's not unheard of to see it go 15, but 20, man, oh man, it's a bridge too far in my view.
Jordan, I know you wouldn't have a ton of personal experience with this, but what do you think about
peaking too soon? I have some, and it's real bitter, friends. Let me tell you. So peaking too soon. I do think it's a thing. I mean, look, Kory's right. Like, it's better to take a 20-point lead any day, right? So I don't want to undersell that. But I think that there's always, like, front-runner status is always also a dangerous time, right? And it's dangerous in the sense that you obviously become the target for attacks, and that allows your opponents to kind of erode some of that momentum. And over time, if it's a lot of time, you can take on, that gives the opportunity for your opponents to try a lot of different attacks to find the ones that stick. And in a hypothetical universe in which your opponents were investing money in paid advertising to push those messages out to really make that resonate with voters. I think there's also vulnerabilities in a couple other ways. And one is that also you can get cocky and make mistakes. And I think we saw a bit of a taste of that in December from the Conservatives, where they were tripping themselves up a little bit more over the Ukraine stuff. People get overly confident, and the larger the lead, the greater the risk that this is. And not necessarily so much for the leader and his own team, but also for caucus, right? So I think people can sometimes interpret a very strong lead as license to really let it all hang out, when in fact, what has gotten them to the strong lead is not an overwhelming wave of love for Pierre Poilievre. It's disdain for Trudeau and fatigue with his government. And so there is still a fairly cautious path that the Conservatives have to walk in terms of presenting themselves to voters. And so I do think that there is a risk of getting cocky and making mistakes and being a little bit too much yourselves, maybe as a whole group. And then the last thing, I think, when you have a lead, and especially when it's a really strong and a really long lead, it can lead to coasting too. It can lead to a mentality where the team is not taking smart political risks. And it can make teams really conservative. And, this is the one I speak to from experience, obviously in the 2015 campaign, 2018 campaign. Yeah. The NDP had a really, really, really strong lead, and And it really led to conservative thinking. It led to a lack of risk taking, and a passivity that was fatal ultimately. And so I think that is something that can creep in with the don't touch that dials mentality that you sometimes see when there's a really strong lead. So leads are awesome. I think any political person in Canada would love to wake up with a 19-point lead that has endured as long as the Conservatives have had, but it's not without its vulnerabilities for sure.
What's that hoary cliche car salespeople always say in the movies just before the real haggling starts? Some variation of, so, Dave, what's it going to take to put you behind the wheel of this beautiful car? Well, when it comes to autonomous, self-driving vehicles, the answer to that is a whole hell of a lot of connectivity. AVs are coming, hurly-burlyites. Remember the nomenclature I introduced last week? They're nearly now. So on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS, let's pop the metaphorical hood on the subject. As uptake and capacity for AVs increase, think of the data streams these cars both produce and require. Basically, it's like the biggest multi-lane highway you can imagine, with traffic traveling in multiple directions, AVs communicating with not just other AVs, but every single vehicle on the road. Also, traffic lights, crosswalks, charging stations, rail crossings, wayfinding programs, and just about everything else floating up there in the cloud. Managing those volumes of data requires exactly what you think: robust, reliable, and expansive networks. Not to mention coast-to-coast coverage. Without it, AVs would be unusable. TELUS continues to be a prime driver in the space, making the necessary billion-dollar investments, pairing their world-class network with the latest driving technology. Consumers benefit with improved safety and reliability, and our economy benefits too, by signaling to business they're a leader in the industry, which spurs even more investment and opportunity. Sort of a virtuous circle in that, eh? But like I've been saying, none of it happens without regulatory conditions that continue to make it all make fiscal sense. Next week, we'll dig deep for another nearly now story: autonomous mining. Scott, Jordan makes the point that when you have a lead like this, there's more scrutiny on you and people assess you maybe a little bit differently. But there's something else in the polling that I find significant, and that is that there are measures like, who do you think would make the best prime minister? Who do you think would best represent Canada internationally? That are normally incumbent advantages even when you're losing. Even when you're losing, that's one of the last things that people change their mind about, because they tend to think that the person who's in that job is best equipped to do that job, and they're not really thinking about the other person in that capacity yet. But this polling indicates to me that people are now starting to assume that Poilievre is going to be the prime minister, thinking about him exercising those prime ministerial responsibilities, and frankly, they're comfortable with it. Yeah,
I agree with that. So it's just absolutely formidable. On the issue of big leads bringing intensified scrutiny, I'm not so sure. I don't see any evidence of that happening. But look, let me take one step back. I want to tell you guys a story about peaking too soon. Okay?
Is this high school?
When I was in grade 9, I fell head over heels in love with a girl. Absolutely dead, dumb, love struck. And then I messed up. And she dumped me, deservedly, and she started dating another guy. Good guy. He was kind of a buddy of mine. And I thought to myself, no worries. He's looking like king shit right now, but that guy is peaking too soon. And so I waited through grade 10 and then through grade 11, and I thought, he's fucking peaked. Okay, like now I've got him, right? By the time the senior formal rolls around, it's all going to fall into my hands. So anyway, long story short, all through high school, all through university, and for quite a few decades of my adult life now, I've been waiting for him to peak too soon, except they got married and they have lovely children and they're a beautiful family and he's a great guy and it's all great. So peaking too soon doesn't actually have to be a thing. It's not necessarily a thing.
About you specifically, Scott?
Well, I just feel like in many ways, every other dimension of my life has mapped against that same pattern. Look, I think the big issue is have people irretrievably made up their minds, and it feels like they have. So then, what's going to disrupt that? So you get driven into, well, let's make a leadership change. Maybe that causes people to take a new look. But as we've discussed many times, it's very difficult to see a leadership change producing a fundamentally and sustaining better outcome. And then the other issue, of course, is how do you use,
it
let's say
usually
we've got
temporarily closes the gap, Scott. It may not
usually
permanently close the gap, but it usually temporarily closes the gap somewhat.
Right. So it may be that that's the only option that's left available. And maybe that Trudeau will opt for that himself. And he feels like when he can't move these numbers after a year and it looks like the outcome is inevitable. But I do think the issue is, will these, and it's inherent in a lot of media analysis, inherent in the Liberal tactics of late, is that he is going to peak too soon. There is going to be, now it's going to be his turn. Pierre Poilievre, is going to suffer all this additional scrutiny. And it's going to be very difficult. And I think, again, in the universe in which we operate from a media perspective, in terms of what's the national conversation and what's the source of that intensity and how does that X-ray get applied? And I just don't know that it happens. And so I'm not convinced that he's going to face the kind of scrutiny that causes people to make that reevaluation. And I'm pretty sure that yelling at him through the microphones in front of the House of Commons doesn't fucking do it. Because if it did it, it would have been doing it in December. It would have done it in January. Maybe they don't need 2 months of it. Maybe they need 6 months of it, but I kind of doubt it.
Just as an aside, Scott, I really hate that they've turned their cabinet into attack dogs.
Well, they think it's good. I think it's terrible. They are like, hey, you know what? Like, we got a new morale, and people are really feeling the energy.
No pulse on that for months now. So actually, I don't hate it because it's better than nothing. Like, I think that
I don't think it is.
I think it is.
I'm not sure it is better than nothing.
They gotta try.
Yeah, well, can I press on this issue of an increased media scrutiny, because I think the conventional thinking around this has always been that that's the case. And I think that's been borne out in a bunch of different election campaigns where you did have that dynamic. I just think that the media environment has changed now to the point where it's very difficult to actually have that occur, because people are so siloed in terms of the media environment that they're operating in that you just don't see it. Like, if you are a progressive voter, you're tuning into the CBC and you're maybe reading some more traditional media sources, and if you're a conservative voter, you have a separate set of sources that you're looking at, and you're maybe looking directly at people's social media platforms and content, and it really takes an enormous push on the paid advertising side to even get a message that's contrary to the sort of self-reinforcing information that you're immersed in. So, like, even so far as that does occur with the media, I think it occurs in a silo where a lot of those voters just are oblivious to it. Even
I agree with that. And just to add to what Kory said, I think that this is a capacity issue on the part of the media, but the days of the type of the investigative journalism that would produce sort of oppo research type results and scrutiny, like, that is gone. So unless your opponents are driving that and feeding it through their own structures, which there's every evidence that that's not the case right now, there's almost no engine for that anymore.
Well,
so I think
it's way more slasher risk than that. It's more slasher risk than that, because A, that is gone. That engine, as you say, is gone from a media standpoint. And B, even if it was produced, it doesn't get seen. So even if you get that piece, like,
you have to put paid.
The tube connects to nobody, right? It's kind of like, where's it go, right? I just want to say one more thing that really zeroes in on the Liberals, and I find myself like, first of all, today's the wrong fucking day to ask me, like, Scott, what's to be optimistic about? And like, nothing. Literally, Krypton is exploding, folks. Put your child in a fucking ship and send it to a different solar system. Have
you noticed how much Brock Purdy looks like Lee Harvey Oswald?
Yeah, that's been commented upon. I don't want to go back there.
These are the meditations people tune in for, guys. Like, right here.
Yeah. Both the Liberals and their manner and harnessing their cabinet ministers to be attack dogs and all of that. I don't know. I just sound like such a sideline critic, and it bugs me. But there's two things about it that I don't like. And I'm setting aside the fun, which I think is your point, David, the fundamental question of whether that strategy can harvest any results whatsoever. But like, even if all it accomplishes is that it gets a little more energy going, I've got two beefs with it. One, you can't have the prime minister doing it, and because it really denatures his brand, and it hyper partisanizes and politicizes every single thing he says, and then he's screaming. And I know we're going to talk about Wells, and I just think cumulatively it's a bad thing for him. But of course, when you don't have advertising or anything else, you've got to harness the biggest horse you have. So that's the PM. So that's the one thing I don't like about it. The second thing about it is it's like they need a huge twist to the dial. Like it's just noise. It's just angry noise. It gets all so. When you have all these kind of ministers, there's no specificity to it. I believe that if you're going to actually try to pop something open where you're going to kind of like plant a thought in people's minds going, well, here's the doubt that maybe I need to have or consider with respect to Poilievre, then you've got to make that thing crystal clear and consistently offer it up. And you probably still won't get heard because of all the issues we talked about. But there's no specificity to it. It's just like, it's knee jerk. Every minister says something else. It's just that it says something negative and loud about Poilievre. And so without that specificity, it's just a kind of, it's just seafoam. It's just kind of here and gone and doesn't matter. It's just ugly to look at and ugly to see.
Well, I don't know what you guys think. I never liked the hard negative coming out of my candidate's mouth.
I don't think it should come out of the PM's mouth, especially.
It drives up your negatives always. You know, this is why you try to keep the attacks away from the first minister and in the hands of others. But look, some of the attacks, like obviously nobody was listening to our advice last week around the attacks on Jenny, because they followed up the next day with doing every SO31 in the House attacking Jenny Byrne on the fact that her company does some work for Loblaws in Ontario. Like, some of the attacks are bizarre. Like, I think that is a bizarre attack. Like, how does that lead to a better ballot outcome for you federally? It just
a crushing waste of time.
Yeah.
We really got her on the run.
So I'm going to say something charitable and then some other things. But I think, the important thing or the significant thing that I would see here is that they've got buy-in among caucus to go negative. And that's new, actually. This is a government that prided itself on being positive, on not, descending to those levels of capital P politics. But here they are. They're at the bottom looking up. And so the view has changed. So I think it's positive, actually, that there is a sense that they're in trouble. And this is a sign of a little bit of fight for them. So that's the good thing. Here's where it's not so good. The attack is weak. If, as we talked about last week, if you were going to shoot for the bear, you do not miss the bear. What they chose in terms of going out on Jenny was weak sauce. No good. Don't put it in the PM's mouth because it runs directly counter to his own personal brand, which the elements of him being likable are probably the last potential salvageable thing that he's got going. So don't fuck that up. They also need to whale away, as Scott said, at the same target. So deciding that you're going to go negative, empowering your caucus to do that, okay, fine. But then having everybody scatter to the winds and tweet things and, it's random attacks everywhere. You need to focus people on one target that is going to work. And they haven't done that. I think that there is a model that can be successful for this, where you find not just everybody, but you find your best 3-4 attack dogs, you rat pack it, you get them going, you get them wailing away at the same thing that through testing is effective, and then you back it with money and paid advertising. But this is not what's happening, right? So I think this is like a sign that there's been some sort of an internal shift, but the execution has not followed through.
With the odd exception, things in business tend to get better, to advance. People might talk about the days when cars were self-repairable contraptions with a motor, carburetors, and a drivetrain, but the modern versions, the ones with covers over the engine and CPUs and computer diagnostic ports, are by just about any measure far better. Notice how rust-proofing and muffler shops have largely disappeared. So it is with trains. They might look much the same, but they are leaner, packed with tech, safer, smoother, and much better for the environment. I've talked about that here before. What I haven't talked about is the basic design of the train's most basic component, the rail car. There was a time, back in the middle of the last century, when boxcars were made of wood, and shippers just filled them up as best as they could with freight. Then, in 1956, a fellow named Malcolm McLean stood watching dock loaders moving freight and filling boxcars, and marveled at lack of efficiency, and had a really big idea: standardized containers that could be loaded and sealed before delivery to the train terminal. They would be theft resistant. They could be transferred seamlessly from trains to trucks to ships at sea. They would be safer. They would take less work to move around. And from the moment the first container shipment was delivered that year, transportation changed profoundly. Today, Malcolm McLean's invention utterly dominates transport. There are car containers to move automobiles, refrigerated containers to carry perishable supplies and food, and all-purpose containers to move just about everything else. They come in every imaginable box shape. They are reusable. They are durable. They are interchangeable. They simplify supply chains. Shippers can track them in real time. And they move the economy. CN, our sponsor, has about 8,000 modern containers in its fleet. It's a long way from the days of dumping cargo in wooden boxcars. Oh, one other thing. CN's container-laden freight trains leave the station and arrive on time. Shipping has never been more reliable. Kory, last word on this, by the way. If the Conservatives are paying a price among Ukrainian voters, I'm not seeing it in the polling numbers from the prairies.
Yeah, well, it's not there. It's not there. That's why you're not seeing it. There's a substantial Ukrainian population in the GTA as well, but it would look like when you look at the numbers in the 905 belt, it's obviously not happening there either. But look, it also just doesn't seem intuitively true. There's always been a more hawkish element on foreign policy from the Conservatives. Traditionally, I think that's maybe more a spillover from U.S. politics than it is something that exists on its own merits here. Because I think Canada's view on foreign affairs rounds down to zero in terms of its impact on global affairs. But it just doesn't seem intuitively true that they would be the party that's soft on Putin. So I just don't think there's a good fundamental base from which to launch that attack in terms of pre-existing public opinion. So I think that's another one that is odd. Like if I were the Liberals, I'd probably be trying to go after them more on some of the economic issues. Like, will you support the investments in battery plants and EV manufacturing, stuff like that affects tens of thousands of jobs and frankly in target seats, and to call into question some things like that. But no signs of that happening. Like I haven't seen that attack level once.
The simple principle is this: don't scream at them about what outrages you. Scream at them about what you know based on research outrages voters or might outrage them,
or creates a risk narrative. But this is I don't think stuff like that creates outrage. Like, how dare you? I think it calls into question, whether or not you're going to have the outcomes that people want. You're introducing risk into the ballot. You could introduce risk around cuts. We've talked about that.
Yes, I think risk around cuts is where to go.
You can do risks around economic management. I think that's a little bit harder, but there are, I think, a few narrow avenues of attack that could be substantive. But you're not seeing that. You're seeing this sort of ankle biting on highly marginal issues, and like who's Jenny
the
Byrne's
lens
firm
that's
works
missing
for.
here is put it like for the Liberals is really just putting the voters at the core of that story, right? Whatever story they're telling about the Conservatives, the voters have to be at the core of it, and that's the piece that they haven't been able to connect yet.
I would not let him weasel off of balanced budgets. If you look at his language, he's starting to talk about fix the budget now rather than balance the budget. Right? I would hang balanced budget around his neck because he doesn't want to deny it. He just wants to use a weasel word for it. And I'd start talking about what $40 billion of cuts looks like and how he's putting an ideology ahead of the interests of people, because most of his voters don't want him to cut $40 billion of government spending.
And it's a massive wide open door because they haven't defined what that's going to be. In fact, they're on the record saying, well, just wait, don't worry. You'll see down the road, which is just an invitation to paint that picture.
Negative isn't a strategy. Negative is just a reflex. It's got to be about something. And that's right now, it's just about everything. All
right. We talked about the diminished role of the media in holding politicians accountable. That segues nicely into our clipping for this week, which is from the aforementioned Paul Wells on his Substack. We've been mentioning Paul a lot on this show. I think 2 more times, and we've paid him back for calling us, for naming us influential in Maclean's magazine a couple of years ago. So almost paid that debt off. Here's what Paul had to. So last week, Bell Media announced that they were laying off 4,800 people and they were selling radio stations, closing TV stations, shutting down news programs, including W5. A lot of people had a strong reaction to this. My favorite was Premier Eby's from British Columbia. But nonetheless, here is what Paul Wells wrote. He quotes Trudeau, and using what he considers to be remarkable language for Trudeau. We've seen over the past years journalistic outlets, radio stations, small community newspapers bought up by corporate entities who then lay off journalists, change the offering, the quality of the offering to people. And when people don't watch as much or engage as much, the corporate entity says, oh, see, they're not profitable anymore. We're going to sell them off. This is the erosion not just of journalism or quality local journalism at a time when people need it more than ever given misinformation and disinformation, but it's eroding our very democracy. As a government, we have been stepping up over the past years, fighting for local journalism, fighting for investments that we can have, while all the while fending off attacks from conservatives and others who say, no, you're trying to buy off journalists. We're trying to support journalism in this country and across the country, but no government can do it alone. Canadians need to demand better, and we will be demanding better from corporate leaders like, in this case, Bell, that are eroding Canadians' ability to know each other, and to trust in the country and the future we are building together. So yeah, I'm pretty pissed off about what just happened. And then Wells says, traditional media are in trouble everywhere. I've been amazed and saddened to see magazines I used to treasure close or shrink to insignificance. I'm not sure you can blame Mirko Bibic for all of it. Large, obvious things are changing in the media landscape around the world. Government subsidy programs that amount to pennies on the dollar of real need will not fix a once-in-centuries upheaval in the way people get their information. It is childish to respond with tantrums. So I think at least 3 of us have some sort of conflict in discussing this issue. So with that caveat, Scott, what do you think about the way Trudeau, politicians in general, but Trudeau in particular, reacted to the Bell Media decision? And does that have any political legs?
Yeah, and just to put a button on it, I've got a massive conflict. I do a ton of work for Bell Media. I'm on air on both radio and TV, and I'm exclusive to them. So we have a relationship. And I found last week just wrenching, just absolutely wrenching. I happened to be hosting News Talk 1010 CFRB for 4 hours on Thursday afternoon. The cuts came down first thing in the morning, and it was awful because over the course of the day, of course, you're seeing, oh God, these producers were let go, and this on-air person, and it's savage. I think a bunch of things, I guess. I think to Wells's general point that, like sort of patented Paul Wells snark on, he's using shitty language, and it's like, okay, but like I can get behind that. I can get behind him saying, hey, fuck, enough of this, right? But, and I don't think that's the worst. Look, on balance, I'd rather my leader care than not care about the diminution of media and what's being lost, and recognizing the fact that there's something inherent here to a healthy functioning democracy. So I'd rather have my leader condemn it than celebrate it. And I see some celebrating it. I got lots of people celebrating it all day long in online comments that I received from people. But Wells's fundamental point is also correct, and not taking Bell off the hook. I mean, people can argue about what obligations they assume when they purchase radio stations or whatever, and I don't know exactly. That's not a cop-out. I just don't know. But I know this. I know that no one knows how to make the model work anymore. I know that local news, which is really important, is almost an impossible thing to execute as a matter of profitable business. I know that a lot of the national news is almost impossible to execute as a matter of a profitable business. No model has emerged that fixes it. And as well-meaning as the policies might be from the federal government, they go centimeters to helping when we're losing by kilometers. So I don't know what the answer is, but again, in keeping with my overall attitude this week, I think things are bad and getting badder. I think things are shitty and getting shittier, and I do think it has a hollowing out effect in terms of the functioning of our democracy. And I know that sounds highfalutin, but I just think that's the fucking truth.
Canada has been a leader in the research, development, and production of nuclear medicine for decades. And with more than 40 million procedures performed around the world each year using medical isotopes, it plays a key role in contributing to the fight against cancer and transforming patient experiences. In addition to producing enough carbon-free nuclear energy to power 1 in 3 homes, businesses, and hospitals in Ontario, today's podcast sponsor, Bruce Power, contributes to the world's healthcare system through medical isotope production, and it continues to build on that legacy as the medical community has moved nuclear medicine into a new era. In addition to harvesting the isotope cobalt-60, used to sterilize 40% of the world's single-use medical devices, Bruce Power is the first commercial nuclear reactor in the world to produce lutetium-177, a medical isotope used for targeted therapy of a growing number of cancers, including neuroendocrine tumors and prostate cancer. This is all done using a first-of-a-kind isotope production system, providing a consistent supply of cancer-fighting isotopes to meet growing worldwide demand through continual operations, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Bruce Power is proud of the role it continues to play in powering medical innovation and fighting cancer. Together, scientists, researchers, doctors, and the nuclear industry are building a better tomorrow. Jordan, what's your take on all this?
Yeah, I mean, the layoffs are devastating. I think there's really no other word for it. This is and this is stuff that we're just not going to get back. That's what really strikes me, I think, now as we go through the second round of layoffs at Bell. And we're not going to get that local news capacity back. We've seen this movie before now. We know this is gone for good. And I think, I agree with Paul Wells' point in general that both the local news system, such as it is in Canada, is broken, perhaps irreparably so, but so too is the way the government is trying to address it. And I guess what struck me this week was a couple things, some related to the policy and some related to the Prime Minister's response. On the policy side, I think it, and to not at all let Bell off the hook, this is still an incredibly profitable company, paying very high dividends, who has been bailed out through several rounds by the government with pinky promises to maintain the quality of local news, to maintain jobs, that's then done nothing of the sort. And, while I think rightly Bell can and should be held to account for that, I also hold the government to account for not actually attaching any binding strings to that money. When vast amounts of money either through CRTC fee deferrals or other types of bailouts are handed out, there does have to be some accountability around that beyond just commitments that are this easily broken. And I think that for the government, this is a lesson that they have had slapped in their face over and over and over again. And so it's frustrating to see that nothing has changed on that level. I think for the Prime Minister, it's interesting because I sort of contrasted his response to Eby's a little bit. They both had really strong language. They both had a really strong emotional response. To me, Eby's rang a little bit truer, rang a little bit, more authentically to his brand. I think for the Prime Minister, it was, and Wells talks about this, it was so clear that there had just been, he'd been sat down in a communications meeting and told to find his big words, and then had gone out and done that. And yeah, fine. Is it better for him to be angry than not angry? Yes. But to me, what this did was it underscored, number one, how rarely we see that level of kind of passion and engagement from the Prime Minister these days. And number two, it also underscored really his impotence in the face of this, right? Okay, so you're angry, but what's happening here? What's going to change? And so for me, I thought that the advice that he received from his communications team was entirely partial. In that sense. And I don't think I'm not sure that it really left them any further ahead on this issue. And I don't have the policy answer on that, but it does seem to me that for the government, as they are in charge of structuring what the bailouts look like for these companies, there is something that they can do. And that's to start tying some strings to this. But, we'll see. We'll see if they go there.
So, Kory, there are very few, if any, votes that are going to be determined by policy toward the media in this election campaign, or concern about the demise of legacy media. Much to my unhappiness, I have polled on this subject, and I know that while Canadians may express some concern, they're not obsessed with the demise of legacy media in the country. So this is not, you don't send the Prime Minister out on this like this because you think this is an issue that's going to galvanize people. You put the Prime Minister out to do a performance like that because you want to convey some impression about the Prime Minister, not about the issue itself. What were they trying to tell us about the Prime Minister with that performance?
Well, I thought he was pandering to the handful of journalists still left in the space about fighting for them and trying to curry favor for them is what I thought it was, because I agree with you. To the general public, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Maybe there's some currency in just railing against corporations. I should probably declare, as Scott did, that my firm does do work for Bell federally. But look, at the end of the day, people aren't going to be shedding tears about W5 being canceled, for instance, because they haven't been watching it for a decade or more. And it's kind of like, we think back to when Lisa Laflamme, got sent away at CTV. When you looked at how many people have actually tuned into the national newscast, it's such a small fraction of what it once was. That the change is hypothetical for most people because they're just not watching it. And this sort of tidal change in terms of media consumption and the business model that supports media companies has changed. And if you want to know who to blame, it's not the Prime Minister or any Prime Minister, and it's not any media company. It's something called the internet. It's just fundamentally restructured the way you can monetize media content in a way that is slowly but surely, and this is not a new thing, driving these companies under. But there no amount of good corporate citizenship is going to have somebody eating $40 million losses in their media company. You just can't do that.
Well, wait a second. I mean, it depends what, Bell's a publicly traded company and the Thompsons are not. But the Thompsons lose a lot of money on the Globe and Mail, and they are prepared to lose a lot of money on the Globe and Mail. Right. Well, and Bell is not prepared to lose any money on Bell Media.
Well, and they can't, and they shouldn't, because what is the difference? the Thompsons, it's a closely held family company, and you've got I think at one point maybe he still is the richest Canadian out there. You've got a mega billionaire who's decided that that for reasons of charity and benevolence, they're going to continue to lose money on this. I think it's more than charity and benevolence. I think it's about influence and other things too. And you've seen other billionaires. I'd look at Jeff Bezos, for instance, with Washington Post. There are others that that have a similar play going on. But Bell is a widely held Canadian company. Like, who owns Bell? We do, all of us on this. And it's not because you have a direct investment through your stock portfolio in most cases. It's through your pension. It's like, this is probably the most widely held company in the entire country. And so, what is the mandate for their board of directors? What is the mandate for their executives? It's to protect those pension investments, to make sure that the company makes money, and they're doing that on behalf of all of us. And
Kory's not
their
wrong.
mandate is not to engage in charitable activity in one area to the detriment of your and my pension. It just isn't.
And I agree with that, but that's where the role of the government coming in to set the table for the terms.
Well, so have they done that?
No, they haven't.
Well, so
that's the problem.
That's okay, but because they're not actually offering a bailout, as we've all, I think, indicated, this is pennies or fractions of pennies when $20 bills are in order. Like the scale of that hasn't prevented
Bell from taking the pennies quite happily over the years.
So but you can't. You're not going to. Like, it's an insufficient financial incentive from the government to drive the outcome that they want.
It should be offered on terms of benefit the public good. Yeah.
Look, Poilievre's point on this is not an irrational one in terms of what is the proper role for the government in terms of supporting these things. But nobody has solved the Rubik's Cube here from a policy standpoint in any way that is even remotely adequate. So
I agree with that.
Until somebody comes up with a better plan, I think it's disingenuous to say the least.
What we know,
but Bell Media basically said this is a clear market failure. We can't make money doing this.
Right.
And they're not. So we're not going to do it anymore because we can't make money. If they can't make money doing it, presumably nobody can make money doing it.
Well, they're stumbling along doing
it. What?
They're stumbling along doing it for a bit. They're holding on to some assets and all that. But fundamentally, if you look at what they're saying, and if you reflect on the broader conversation that even we are having, the truth of the matter is, how long does it make sense for Bell to own media assets? Because at some point, it's going to say, well, these are things that lose money, and we're not going to do that. And it's not like there's an economic model out there that makes it rational for somebody else to come along and say, well, we'll scoop up those assets and we'll actually oversee them independently because you're going to lose money.
Wait a second. We are what's coming next. This podcast and others like it are.
This drives me crazy. Next. This goes back to David's Canada Land.
That is.
We're just jerking off. We're not reporting on what's happening on news. It's like on top of the news that, thank God, CBC and CTV are there to report.
Well, there's a lot of similar jerking off going on the cable news networks as well, too.
Well, that's only because we're infinitely cheaper.
But they have a foundation to report it. It's editorially overseen.
All right, so you don't like it, is what you're saying, but what I'm saying is still absolutely fundamentally true. Okay, but there are other people who are doing commentary as part of the news environment. It is, and editorial has always been a part of every media outlet ever. So that's bullshit. It's part of it. We aren't an all-encompassing answer. Well, we're not an all-encompassing replacement, but there are other people who are doing news at a local level in a different business model and with a different approach. But, at the end of the day...
But it's apple pie without steak and potatoes.
All right. Well, old man shouts at cloud is what you're doing. Like, where do you go with that?
Last week's pod marked the return of our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, with an important message about the most pressing political issue of our time, the cost of housing. OREA's recent housing research paper, Ontario's Efforts to Boost Housing Supply, offers specific recommendations on how Ontario can end the housing crisis. One of OREA's main recommendations is to end the practice of exclusionary zoning. What does this mean? Practically speaking, if I want to tear down a wartime bungalow to build a duplex, triplex, or fourplex to provide affordable housing options for multiple families, I will often run into resistance because the area is zoned for single-family detached homes only, leaving families left out of affordable housing options. Too often, moves to have this area rezoned to allow for multi-unit development are met with high costs, red tape, and opposition from NIMBYs that prevent affordable housing options in their community. While some progress in limiting exclusionary zoning has been made, OREA is asking MPPs to finish the job by making this a provincial policy. In other words, they're asking Queen's Park to implement changes to end exclusionary zoning across Ontario. While controversial for some, it is important that decision makers use all the tools available to make municipal governments build more homes faster, because more must be done to give people in Ontario the homes they need today and in the future. Remember, Hurly-Burleyites, bold action builds homes. To read OREA's full report on how Ontario can end the housing crisis, go to orea.com/advocacy/housing-supply. I really believe at some point we've got to find a way to establish, just like you need baseline power in an electrical system, you need baseline fact situations in a democracy. And we can fight about what to do about the facts, but we shouldn't be fighting about the facts.
It was subsidized by the government and owned by the government. If only we had.
But the CBC has long ago gotten out of the local news business. By and large, they are out.
They're out.
They're less in it than they used to be, but they're still overwhelmingly in it in comparison to anything else.
Let me explain what I mean. Where's their fucking audience? Okay, are they putting out content?
That's for sure.
Yes. Is there anyone watching? No one is watching. So they have the market has left them, and so you can say that is the product, and that's probably partially true, but it is largely the way individuals consume media content now, and that has fundamentally changed, and the audience is gone, and so the ability to monetize audience is gone. But even if you took away the need for an audience to monetize it, which is basically what the CBC is a $1 billion subsidy to a network with no audience. They have an audience in radio, but not in TV, and they haven't for a long, long time. So, if the audience is gone, then, what is it you're trying to support? This is why I say I don't think anyone has solved the Rubik's Cube here yet from a policy perspective, but news viewers have certainly made a decision. They've made a decision with their eyeballs to look elsewhere, and that's what they're doing. And so, we can like it or lump it, but either way, the fundamentals on the economic side are not changing anytime soon, as far as I can see.
So we're not going to fix that issue, and nobody really cares what we think on this issue. I just want to drag it back to politics for 1 second. When Kory says, "Well, I think that the PM was being loud and voluble because he wanted to pander to remaining journalists," I don't think that's right. I think it's indicative of the earlier conversation we're having. I think what you see is there's a meta strategy happening out of the PMO these days, which is, but it's unguided. It's just, you know what? Strip your language down, be louder, show emotion, go negative on Poilievre, but that's all that it is. It's not guided, right? So I think this is just, I think that I don't think he was being phony. I don't think that he was pandering to journalists. But I do think in execution, it's all part of this broader piece, which is, it's kind of like, I don't know what else to do. So listen, what we're going to do is show more pep and energy. And I don't think it's moving any dials, except for caucus and cabinet feel a little bit better about themselves because they feel like they're throwing some back. But
a substitute for action.
Right.
So I'm just gonna wrap this up by saying that I think there is a silver lining in all this, which is presumably with CTV canceling their lunchtime news shows, they'll be bringing back the Flintstones to lunch hour.
I hope
so. Kids across the country will get to watch the Flintstones over lunch hour, which was, a CTV special when I was a kid.
Very important one.
And Rocket Robin Hood. And the brothers marching together, heads held high, and all kinds of
It's really hard to take Friar Tuck seriously. But anyway, okay, Ontario. Interesting shit going on in Ontario. Interesting shit. The provincial polling shows the Conservatives still in a significant lead situation. They tend to show the Liberals having inched above the NDP either a little bit or noticeably, depending on the poll, into second place. Ford appears to certainly think that Crombie and the Liberals are his target. At the speech he gave to their convention, didn't mention Stiles or the NDP, went after Crombie pretty hard, has had an advertising campaign against Crombie. Ford likes Trudeau. And so they appear together. They did the big announcement on healthcare last week. And Ford doesn't, which is I think very interesting, attack Trudeau to attack Crombie. He does not tie Crombie to Trudeau in an attempt to drive her numbers down, which would be a pretty normal tactic to be employing right now. Trudeau's likely to be gone by the time of the next Ontario election. So what is the dynamic? And Kory, you're probably the right person to lead us off here. What is the dynamic that's going on there? Why isn't Ford using Trudeau's weakness in Ontario more?
Well, he is in advertising. If you look at the ads on Crombie, Trudeau's image appears in them, and along with attacks on carbon tax and tying Crombie to Trudeau on that issue, because I think it's the most salient of the issues around affordability that are out there. Right. And so I think it is happening, but what I think is also happening, and I would say I don't think it's that Trudeau, that Ford likes Trudeau particularly, but it's a conundrum that you have when you're government. And, so what are you going to do? Are you going to not sign a healthcare deal with the federal government? And, how does that represent the interests of the voters of Ontario? Are you not going to do transit deals with them? Are you not going to work with them on trying to stop auto theft? Like, you're going to have to, if you're a responsible government, engage with governments at different levels. And you've seen this with Ford as well, with how he's been engaging with Olivia Chow. And I think part of Ford's brand over time that has developed is one where he can work with other people no matter what party stripe they're with. I got along very well with Horrigan, NDP premier, when he was there. Gets along just fine with EB now. Gets along well with Legault. Gets along well also with Scott Moe. So you have to be able to work with people who are elected at other levels of government in a responsible way, and I think voters like that. That said, Ford won his leadership campaign attacking a carbon tax. It was central in the 2018 election campaign in terms of messaging from them. And based on the ads that are running now against Crombie, he's attacking on the carbon tax again. So I think there are areas of commonality there. I think it's there, at a personal level, he and Poilievre aren't on the friendliest of terms, but I'm not sure anyone's on the friendliest of terms with Poilievre, because I don't think that's sort of how he operates politically. He's not kind of a Mulrooney-esque, backslapper, glad-hander, retail relationships with other politicians in the way that some previous leaders have been. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it harkens to the approach that Harper had, which was much more on the substance of things, less on personal relationships. But there's more than one way to be successful. But
Ford would be better off. Ford would be better off if Trudeau beat Poilievre, right?
I don't think so. I think the commonality in terms of their agendas is different in terms of where those Venn diagrams overlap. Right. Clearly for the province right now, with huge investments going into nuclear and the auto plants and all of that, there are parts of that agenda where it's probably easier to get agreement with the Trudeau government than it would be with the Poilievre government. But there are a whole other range of issues where agreement with Poilievre is easier.
But I was thinking more about an election. Tax. I was thinking more about the next election, which it would be great for Ford if there was a even older, more tired, more unpopular Liberal government hanging around than if suddenly he had to defend the first Poilievre budget. Right?
Possibly. I guess it depends what's in that first budget. But, where there's a counter-cyclical element to, the Ontario provincial governments and federal governments, in my read of it, is when when your party at the federal level is very unpopular, that can drag you down. And I think you're seeing some of that probably with Crombie right now. But, when will the next Ontario election be? It'll probably be in the honeymoon period of a Poilievre federal government. So, I guess it's a disadvantage not having Trudeau there in terms of being an anvil on the ankle of Crombie. But I don't think Poilievre government's going to be an anvil on the ankle of Ford. So I think it becomes more of a neutral question given the timing of the two election campaigns.
It was pretty amazing back in the 80s how quickly, like when Trudeau was defeated, when Trudeau left office and Mulroney became prime minister, there were no Liberal provincial governments in all of Canada. And it was pretty interesting how quickly they started to flip.
Yep.
Within a couple of years, they started to roll over.
Within a couple of, that's the key point, within a couple of years. And, but is it in 10 months? Because that's kind of what you're going to be looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think timing's in his favor.
Innovative, genius, and remarkable vaccine technology helped us get out of the pandemic. Remember that feeling that we turned a corner thanks to vaccines? I'll never forget it. Crucial to this success were lipid nanoparticles, developed over decades of research right here in Canada. Peter Cullis's 40-year dedication at UBC was pivotal, setting the stage for rapid mRNA vaccine development, a feat of foresight and innovation. Investing in research can save lives tomorrow. That's why U15 Canada, a group of Canada's leading research universities, is a proud member of the Coalition for Canadian Research. The Coalition is urging the federal government to support science and talented Canadian researchers with new funding in the upcoming budget. We must support Canadian ambition, full stop. In the coming weeks, we'll highlight Canadian research breakthroughs, showcasing the impact of sustained investment. Visit researchcoalition.ca to learn more. Jordan, where do the NDP fit into this map of Ontario? They're kind of getting lost in the shuffle, both federally and provincially.
Well, I mean, they've had in Ontario, they've had a rough year, that's for sure, a rough end of last year. But I guess, what I'm really struck by too is that if you look at the polling, sort of comparing, November to today, things are pretty flat. Like you still haven't seen a really significant bump for Crombie. Like the Liberal brand remains quite strong, but there's just not a lot of movement happening. Okay. And so I think that Marit and Crombie both in one sense, have a similar challenge. They're not terribly known for their own brands with Ontario voters. Maybe, obviously some regional exceptions for Crombie, but I think they need to get out there and tell their own story and make a mark. And of course, the bad news for the NDP is that they lost the last half of the last year because of internal problems. I think, for the NDP, like they're making some of the right choices. Like they're putting Marit out there on the road. She's going to conservative held ridings. That's all I think the right stuff to do in that situation. The confidence and supply agreement is a bit of a double-edged sword for them as well. It can be very unpopular in some of those ridings that they're trying to target, and that they're having really tight and tough races with the Conservatives in. But if it does actually bear some fruit for the federal NDP in terms of some policy wins, they might be able to turn it into a little bit of a strength. But they're at the mercy of Singh in that sense. So they kind of have to roll with it. And I think that their hope is that if the Conservatives are able to put a lot of the muscle and the money behind the paid advertising to knock Crombie down and to really smother any potential momentum that she might have, which it looks like, they've been quite successful thanks to the dark arts of our friend here. That they also will derive some side benefit for that. So I don't hate the position for the NDP right now. I think that Marit not having anyone punching away at her is not a bad thing. She can go out. She's still got the opportunity to define herself with voters. They need to go out and do that. But there is an opportunity if progressive voters are looking around, which they may be, as Crombie brings the Liberals back more towards the center. I think that there's an opportunity for them there. But of course, the question is, how do they use the time? They didn't use the time well in the last 6 months, so they need to make some changes internally around that going forward this year.
Scott, what do you think about Crombie's positioning on this? I mean, the federal Liberals are at 28% in Ontario. Does she need to substantially differentiate herself?
I'm not sure she does. I'm not certain that that's going to be the dynamic in the next election. And as a consequence, I'm not certain I would risk I would risk a near-term statement of difference with Trudeau, knowing what that will do to your rank and file. Because in Ontario, for Liberals at least, I can't speak about the other parties, there's an awful lot of overlap in terms of those riding associations and volunteers and that kind of world. Ontario Liberals think of themselves as federal Liberals, so you would only do that if you really felt you needed to. And given all the reasons that Kory was talking about in terms of the cycle, I'm not sure I'd need to worry about that. I would, if I was her, I wouldn't even worry about the NDP, to be honest. I think what they need to worry about is what's been missing for 5 years, which is what's the core critique of the Ford government and what's the fundamental case for change. And, you can probably look at it and say, I think I see some potential emerging ingredients. They're event dependent, right? You need the police investigation to come in and say, we found some sleazy characters doing sleazy things that demand prosecution. So that will help you. That would be a big explosion. It would take all that green belt stuff and just the aura of bad guys making money on government decisions. It would put all that back in traffic, and you could do with that. But in any event, I won't go down the speculative route. I don't think she needs to worry, and I don't think she has a luxury of worrying about how she measures up against the Liberal brand. I just think, if she wants to distance herself from the carbon tax, there's going to be plenty of time to do that. And I think that, the truth of the matter is the federal election may take care of a lot of these headaches. So I would concentrate on the core critique.
Did you notice, by the way, you three, that the first two candidates for the NDP leadership in Alberta have come out against the carbon tax? This thing is as dead as it can be politically. Like, it has no defenders anymore. The NDP run against the fucking thing now.
Yeah, and why would they go to bat for this policy that the federal Liberals have so completely inarticulately defended, right? Like, there is no sense in anybody carrying water for that.
Yeah. So I was at a RBC event. They put out a big climate change report.
Yeah. John Stackhouse on the early.
Yeah, no, very interesting. But the guest speaker that was speaking to it all, interestingly enough, was Mark Carney. And because I'm a smart ass, I stood up and asked him a question as to what would you replace a consumer level carbon tax with? Because it looks like it's going to be gone. Not surprisingly, he did not want to answer that question very directly, other than to say you should replace it with something. But I think that's where a salient question is going to come, not just in Ontario provincial politics, but I think in provincial races across the country. What is it that you're going to do around climate change response instead of a consumer level carbon tax? Because I think it's going away. I'm actually going to be on Hotel Pacifico this week. This is one of the things we're going to be talking about there. I think it's very interesting because, look, you've got provincial governments like the Liberal government provincially in BC when it was around that brought in a carbon tax. very unpopular in BC with a huge swath of their voters. As you pointed out correctly, NDP candidates coming out against a carbon tax. It just seems like it's a dead idea. So what is it you're going to replace it with? And if it's another version of same, I think you're going to have a lot of difficulty selling that politically to voters right now. So what is the approach? I think there's going to be a big fight on this stuff in provincial capitals across the country.
All right. Well, with that, I think it's time to bring in Mr. Pinsent, wrap the show up.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Who wants to start with their Hey You?
Well, I can.
I'll go.
We all want to go.
Now we all want to go.
Everybody's anxious.
I will sit back.
I'd like to go first. I'm going to be on Hotel Pacifico. I wasn't even cheering for the Niners. Fucking everything's rosy for him.
Kory got the reach for the top buzzer first. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, mine's just to our audience to recommend that folks who are interested in the Ukraine conflict, I would recommend, and Scott, you're going to hate this, listening to the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin. I thought it was interesting, not insofar as what Carlson said or didn't say during it, but to get a window into the mind of Putin, which is is probably the hardest interview to get in the world right now, and probably one of the most important ones to get in terms of having an understanding of what Russia's thinking around the conflict. What my takeaway is that once you get past all the histrionics of who different parts of what is Ukraine now belongs to historically, etc., is that it's this is going to end the way all wars end. It's going to end at the negotiating table, not on the battlefield, and people starting to get their heads around what that looks like and having an understanding of what Russia's negotiating position is going to be is of interest.
All right, Jordan.
So my Hey You is some free advice to the Ontario government. So today is the ruling on the appeal of Bill 124, so the arbitrary cap on public sector wages. And so my Hey You is to the government to say, stop fucking appealing, because you have already lost the battle. You have lost the battle in terms of public opinion on this, and you've already had to pay out millions of dollars in back pay to public servants who had their wages capped by this. This bill has contributed to the crisis in our healthcare system. And lastly, this bill allows your opponents to position you as being anti-worker. Like, we are not talking fat cat civil servants here, folks. We're talking about nurses. We're talking about correctional service workers. I think that it would be wise for the Ford government to take the opportunity here to drop this battle, both for pragmatic and political reasons, because this is not a great moment to be looking like you're waging war against very modestly paid public sector workers.
There you go. Well, as direct an appeal as you ever get on this show.
My bill's in the mail, sir.
There you go.
Scott?
I guess in a very indirect way, it relates to Kory's Hey You. My Hey You is to Joe Biden. Step down, like pull the emergency alarm and trigger some kind of impromptu process of a primary. Donald Trump is a magnificently intimidating threat to our institutions and to global stability. His comments on the weekend about NATO were just the latest. And that press conference that Joe Biden gave last week was one of the most harrowing things I've ever seen an incumbent president do. His bleeding out at the microphone, right? My memory's fine. It is up there with, I'm not a crook, and I did not have sexual relations with that woman, in terms of absolute disastrous presidential press conference moments. And the verdict is in on this thing. And I don't say this with any sense of celebration. I think Joe Biden has done the world an enormous favor by winning the last election. but he would have done an even greater service to the world by stepping down before this point. And the verdict's in. People think he's too old to hold the office. They may think that age is too great to be president, but they certainly think he lacks the fitness and the alertness. And that press conference proved the doubters right. And it's a train wreck. You're handing the country and the world over to Donald Trump. The fucking world over to this orange madman. You just gotta, please, for the sake of humanity, step down.
Yeah, I'm just
stunning.
My hey you is my hey you. I'm going to just second that. That was going to be mine. Although I don't know whether my hey you goes out to Joe Biden or to Jill Biden, because I don't know who could possibly make this influence now. Because my take, Scott, is that he's not listening to his staff on this kind of thing at all. I cannot believe that his staff recommended that he do that news conference.
No question.
I can't imagine it.
Right? He must have just been like, I'm fucking not taking this shit, and I'm going out there to see if I can work the remote control. And it was fucking awful. I mean, I think it's an inflection point in this race.
I do too.
I think it makes it impossible for Biden to win going forward after this, and the stakes are just too high. I know that it's logistically very complicated and personally difficult for him, but that has to happen, or it's a historic mistake on Biden's part.
Paul Begala's comments were pretty damning. I don't know if you read those, but basically, yeah, pull the fire alarm.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much for today. Lots of fun. Jordan, great to have you back in Canada.
Mostly good to be here.
Very good to be here. Thanks, everybody who watched or listened to the show today. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN Rail, Bruce Power, Aurea, and U15 Canada. And we'll be back next week with more of the Curse of Politics, and it'll be, less sad than Scott was today. Right? Scott will come in a better mood next week, I promise. All right, everybody.
If I come at all.
Yeah, see you next week. Take care of yourselves.